Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, friends and newcomers, and welcome to our South Orange Library Special Conversations with Special People. Today we have a wonderful speaker and friend, Dr. Maria Masucci, Associate Dean for Faculty in Arts and Sciences and Professor of Anthropology and Archaeology at Drew University. Maria first spoke here on March 3rd, 2005 on the topic Ancient Ancestors of the Southwest. And then you spoke in 2006 on Fighting the Man, People versus Multinational Companies in Ecuador and Colorado. You spoke in 2010, Stealing Water, Our Biggest Global Problem. 2017, Tombs and Tales, Conservation in Ecuador. And 2018, on the Ancient Sea Travelers. Maria, you've always been so kind and thoughtful throughout the years by donating your time and lectures. We learned so much. And this time it's completely different. This is very local. Today, it's life along the river, revealing the impact of industrialization in Chatham, New Jersey from 1890 to 1920. I can't wait to hear it. It's a delight just to see you again here and also to learn something local and not think about anything that's going on in the world besides what happened in 1890 to 1920 in Chatham. So please, let's give a great big applause to introduce our very special guest, Maria Masucci.
Okay. Thank you all. And I'm really glad to be here. And it's funny to listen to the whole sequence, Phyllis. Yes, I've been really pleased to always be able to come and speak with you all over the years. We do have a PowerPoint presentation, but it looks like I've been disabled. So I don't know if Michael could enable the screen share for me. So because we're going to show let's see. Yep, it's working now. Thank you. And let me go ahead and see if so let me know if you're able to see that.
Yep. I can see it, but the people on the phones can't. So you want to read what it says?
Sure. With the PowerPoint, it will really show you a lot of, it will be a mix of what we've been able to find in terms of artifacts at the Chatham Stanley Park archaeological sites. It's no one thinks of it as an archaeological site. They think of it as basically a dog walking park, but it actually is. What we've been able to see is a really quite interesting and important historical site. And so we'll be showing you some of the artifacts that have been recovered there, just literally from the surface. They are on the surface, they're being trampled on, and a lot of them are eroding into the river. Everything that our students have been working on from the sites has been collected straight from the surface. There's never been any excavations or anything done there. And also then what the students have been able to find in terms of the actual explanation or reconstruction of the artifacts. The internet has been an incredible tool, especially during COVID, to be able to understand and reveal what these artifacts tell us about what the site represents. So the title of the presentation is, Phyllis already gave you, Life Along the River. And so I just want to give you a really quick, let's see, yeah, so let me go. A really quick idea of what the site is, and then we'll actually start talking about what we think it means. Back in, really it was late 1990s, I would take my son, some of you have even met him when I used to bring him sometimes to the talks when he was little. Right. So I used to take him, he was a runner, he needed to be run like a dog, and I would take him to this park, and he would run, and he actually was one of the first who started finding all the artifacts on the ground. And it was so interesting. I tried to find out, I thought, oh, this must be an important site. It's listed on the New Jersey Register as a destroyed site with no value because it's destroyed. And Summit, it's on the, and you'll be seeing maps of where it's located. It's called Stanley Park. It's on the Summit side of the Passaic River, right along River Road. And so, you know, I took some students out to say, what's going on here? Summit did not seem to have any great interest in it at the time. And so we would just collect the artifacts that were going to erode into the river or that were going to be destroyed by people walking across them, just to try to preserve them. And then over the years, the students have used them to help me to study them. And then because of COVID, we wanted to continue with archaeology in some way, even though we couldn't actually get out and do much work. But you'll see in the pictures, we went out regardless with our masks and just to try to see this, you know, how the site was doing. And it's still there with a lot of artifacts on the surface. And so that's really where the material came from, is right there along River Road at Stanley Park, and has been collected over the years as a sort of, you know, preservation and recovery by the students from Drew in the archaeology program. So now I'd like to turn it over to one of my students, and they'll introduce themselves in sequence, and they'll be taking you through some of the information and some of the work we've been doing during COVID on this project.
So hi everyone, thank you for having me today.
Excuse me, Maria, did you tell them that most of the people are on the phone? So to describe it if they have to.
Okay.
Because most people will not be seeing it.
Okay.
So my name is Amy and I'm currently a senior here at Drew University, and I am studying art history, museum studies, and archaeology. So before I go into the exact purpose and methods of our project, I thought it would be important to define the term archaeology and digital archaeology. So archaeology is the systematic study of our human past using surviving material remains. It provides insight into the lifeways of past peoples and cultures, which can help us better understand our lives today and in the future. It also explains the processes that influence patterns of past human behavior and informs us of the larger patterns of change over time in human societies. With the proliferation of digital platforms, it is inevitable that the new field of digital archaeology is gaining popularity. And digital archaeology can be defined as the application of digital technologies to assist and improve traditional practices in collecting data, analyzing, interpreting, and representing the archaeological record. And some examples of digital archaeology can include ground penetrating radar, geographic information systems, and digital asset management systems. And by using these technologies in interactive ways, we can present them to the public on a larger and more global scale. And recognizing this, we imbued this into our project, primarily through the use of digital asset management systems, which I will explain in this slide. So just a little bit of an overview of our project at large. Our research focused on the industrialization of Chatham Township at the turn of the 20th century. And here we examined how industrialization has affected the accessibility of consumer products, marketing techniques in the history of marketing, and consumer trends. We are currently in the process of digitally curating these exhibitions that connect the broader themes of our project, including fashion, diet and health, and marketing. And all of the information that we have collected from our artifact analysis, historical research, and oral histories has been condensed into a website and digital asset management system, which I will put the link in the chat really quick if you are interested in exploring the website a little further. And I'm not sure, Professor, if you want to go on the link just to show them or to show them at the end.
Is she showing it now? Because I don't see it either.
She's pulling up the website and then I think
Oh.
she's gonna screen share it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Let's see. There we go. All right. So if you're interested in visiting the website, it is housed on the Drew Anthropology and Archaeology page. And you just have to click on the Digital Archaeology Projects tab, where you will be taken to this page that just gives another overview about what archaeology and digital archaeology is. And then we have multiple projects, but our focus is on the Passaic River, where you can see we have a little bit of background information about the river itself, and we identify our research interests. And it is also broken down into further tabs that include a timeline of the history of Chatham, some important maps, and a couple oral histories and interviews that we have conducted. And finally, at the bottom, we have a tab that says items, where it will directly link to our DAMS, the Digital Asset Management System, where you can explore the artifacts that we have analyzed and put into artifact report sheets.
Okay, thank you, Amy. So do we want to go ahead and go to the next slide? There we go. Okay. Thank you, Amy. That was, yeah, it was a nice overview. So now, sort of zeroing in on some of what Amy was mentioning. So we've actually developed much more detail on the maps and the time. So Juliet will go ahead and present that.
I'm Juliet. I'm currently a sophomore at Drew University. I'm majoring in history, anthropology, and French with a minor in archaeology. And for this project, I really focused in on the space and time aspect. So on this slide, I have some of the maps that I've used. So these early maps that I found and the contemporary ones from Google Earth really helped us find our spot in space. So one of the most important maps were the Sanborn maps. They showed us both Chatham and Summit in 1921, and they gave us a view of the area from both counties and both sides. Another very useful map was the 1868 map, which is pictured at the bottom right. And then I also used Google Earth, which allowed me to get to the exact coordinates of both the sites and the possible locations of the mill and look at them through time. Google Earth has this really cool feature where you can look at things through their past satellite images. In this area, it only goes back as far as 1991, but it was still useful because I could view things from 2 different seasons. So the bottom 2 images show the same site, but one is in spring and the other one is in winter. And you can see the geographical features better in the winter one. So this tool was very useful for looking at the geographical features. I also used Google Maps. I created my own map project. And from there, I charted the 2 sites and I added all of the places where all the different artifacts originated from. Okay, you can click on the link. So this is the map that I created. All the lines connect all the different artifacts, and I have all the different zones. And if you click on any of the links, the little tabs, they tell you what was from there. So from here, that's where McLaren's imperial cheese was imported from. So it shows the original area where all the products or the artifacts were produced before coming to our site. Yeah, if you zoom in, a fair amount of the artifacts came from the East Coast, a lot from New York, and some from Elizabeth and Newark, as well as one from Canada, and some from England and Germany.
Yes, so, and as you'll see as we go through some of the artifacts, that they sound very familiar. They're companies that a lot of them had their origins in the mid 19th century, and they're still around today. So Heinz, Armour, you know, a lot of them you'll actually recognize, and their origin point was at, you know, during this time. Okay, that's great. Okay, I'm going to go back out. We could spend a lot of time on that one, Juliet, but I think we can share this with everyone afterwards. So if you're interested in exploring it, Phyllis, we can share our PowerPoint with everyone so they could explore it on their own as well.
Oh, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, because there's a lot of information. Okay, Juliet.
So this map here is the Sanborn map from Chatham from 1921. And it shows in the red circle our site. It doesn't show that much of it because most of the site is on the summit side. And then this is the summit map from the Sanborn maps from 1921. And again, the circle shows the site. And here you can see a lot more of the site. The long rectangular block there is a building. I'm not quite sure what that building is, but the smaller building has a D and an X on it. And that means that it was a shingled building that was used for domestic purposes. So that's where our domestic site was from our two sites.
Juliet just mentioned that there were two sites, so I'll clarify. And now that we have the map here, I wanted you to have the map to be able to see, is that this road, this is actually a road. This is the modern road as well. It comes through the middle of Stanley Park. And so the Passaic River runs, you know, right along the park. And so the modern day Chatham side is over here, and the modern day Summit side is right here. And so where we found two major artifact concentrations, and that's why we refer to it as two sites, is one is on this eastern side of the road over into the woods. Is we have found a lot of what we would call domestic trash, meaning dishes, bottles. We've even found, you know, utensils, and a whole range, you know, that you're going to see. But that's what we would refer to as this domestic site. On this other side of the road, in the woods on the other side, has been where we found industrial trash. So that is machine pieces, bricks. But then also we will sort of show you what we call kind of like our mystery artifacts, is another set of artifacts, which are also very, you know, very distinct, that are in concentrations. And you'll see their clothing pieces, and then also some of the manufacturing trash from the mills. So that's why we refer to it as these two sites. There's these two concentrations that are very distinct in what's found on either side. And the one strange thing is that we did find is that in this more industrial side, there are very common porcelain doll pieces. So we have a lot of things to try to explain why with the industrial trash, we have porcelain doll pieces, but on the domestic side, it's definitely, we have never found a single doll piece over on the domestic side. So it is very interesting span of artifacts, but that's part of what we're trying to determine, is what the site was and how it was used and how this material ended up there. So, okay, Juliet.
So this map is the 1868 map. And it shows the Chatham side. And what's interesting about this map is the red circle shows where the mill is, and the mill is labeled on the map, but the mill is labeled on the Chatham side of the river and not on the Summit side, which is very interesting. It's contrary to the other maps that we have found.
So Juliet just brought in another piece. It's like a mystery, you know, with clues, is that we do have another piece of information in that we do know, and Emily is going to give you some more details on this. We do know that there were mills in that area. So that gives us another clue to what the material represents. So from Juliet's work on looking at the actual maps to see what kind of structures are recorded for the area, as well as Emily's going to talk about the information about the mills that were there. And so, Juliet, yeah, go ahead.
So this is the more of the time aspect of what I focused on. I used the Night Labs timeline tool, which is free to use, and I created a timeline of specific events and artifacts that related to this site.
Take some time to load our timeline, I guess.
She's adorable.
Yeah. Should it take that long, Juliet? Or do you
I
think
don't
it's,
know, it didn't take that long last time.
there we go.
Okay. Yes, so this is the timeline. And it's the history of Chatham, which is our project. So we have George Page. He bought the mill and the sites on Chatham. And then I put in the map of Chatham, the 1868 map, and it shows where the mill possibly could have been, as well as some other structures. And these are some of the artifacts that we found on the more industrial site. So we found tar roof shingles. And so George Page's mill produced tar roofing shingles. These shingles were made from imported felt and then were soaked in tar to create roof shingles. We also found what may have been felt clothing. We're not completely sure. It could have also just been there was a lot of just excess felt that was left there at the site. We also know from the oral history that there wasn't any clothing produced, but we have found evidence of certain clothing parts on the site. Then I put in Stanley Terrace. This was where most of the mill workers lived, and George Shepherd Page also helped them construct a general store on this area so they could buy goods imported from their country to make it feel more like home. And then here are just a few artifacts that I thought I could mention quickly. So most of them are from the domestic side. So this is Dundee marmalade, and it was very popular during the time, and it started being imported into the United States, and it originated in England. Hartley's jam was another popular product. It was imported into the United States from England, and it still remains the leading company in Britain today. And then Phillips milk of magnesia is also a product that is still used today, though it has definitely changed over time. The company still exists, and it was actually made in America. Rue de la Cloche originated in Germany, and it's a very famous cologne, and it was number 4711. And this name has become associated with prestige in the perfume and cologne industry. And it was originally used in 1792.
It was the Chanel number 5 of the 19th century.
And this was a really interesting product. It's Ingram's milkweed cream. And they advertised it as it improves bad complexion and preserves good complexion, and it is a highly endorsed skin food. Rising Sun Brewery was one of the beer bottles that we found at the site, and it was a local brewery in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And then Golden's mustard was a very popular condiment like marmalade that was used to enhance the flavor of food. And McLaren's Imperial cheese is actually imported from Ontario, and it was a processed cheddar cheese product.
Cheese whiz.
And then in 1892, George Shepherd Page passed away, and the mills ran for a little bit longer as a candy factory, but it was eventually shut down when the candy factory went out of business.
So, so that gives you a really nice overview of the full, of that late 19th century and some of the span of artifacts. And now we wanted to zero in on some of the added context from oral history that Emily Graves worked on, and then we'll go back and look more deeply at some of the artifacts and what they tell us.
So my name is Emily. I'm a senior at Drew, and I'm majoring in anthropology, minoring in history. And I'm going to be talking about the oral histories and just overall background that I learned in my research. So general background, I was looking mostly into George Shepherd Page. He lived from 1838 to 1892. He was born in Maine, and then he moved to New York City, and then finally to Chatham, New Jersey. He was in the coal tar, creosote, and roofing businesses. He was an avid fisher and lover of dogs, and he was a Christian who started the Stanley Congregational Church in Chatham. So the oral histories were provided by Pam Wells of the Chatham Township Historical Society and Sarah Stanley, who is a relative of George Page, and her husband, Don Davidson. Further information was provided by Martha Wells of the Chatham Township Historical Society, Susan Allen of the Chatham Historical Society, and various internet archives. The picture in the middle is a piece of coal tar covered felt that we found at the site, and it's got gravel pebbles burned into one side, and we could never really figure out why that was. The picture on the right was provided by Susan Allen. It's basically a record book of the Stanley Congregational Church. So I'm just going to talk about the photos. They're both photos of the Stanley Felt Mill, but just from different viewpoints. So the first one is looking across the river, and then the other one actually has like a little plaque that says what it is. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I just now wanted to go over some of the key highlights from my interviews. So George Shepherd Page started out in the coal tar business with his father, Samuel. While Samuel used the natural byproduct to power gas lamps and to make creosote for ships, like they would cover it, and they would cover ships with this stuff so that marine life couldn't like grow on the ships. George went into the roofing business. So basically what he did, as Juliet said, they would import felt, soak it in the coal tar, they would wait for it to dry, and then they would roll it up and use it for roofing. George Page originally moved to Chatham after 2 of his children died of consumption while living in New York City. He wanted to move to a place that was cleaner, and so he took the rail lines out to different parts in the countryside of New Jersey. He got to Chatham and he thought that it was like just a beautiful place, and he could see that it was a very practical place to set up shop with the river and the railroad right by. And so he bought some mills and land from the Bonnell family. And while the mills were very successful, they became derelict after he died because none of his children were interested in continuing the roofing business. Like Juliet said, after a couple years after he died, a candy factory took over, but once that one went out of business, the mills were just torn down. George Page loved to travel. He went to England many times. The main reason that he went to England, he was just inspired by the industrial nature of England, and he went over many times to kind of get machine plans and just talk to people who were already in this business in England. He basically like revolutionized this franchise in America. He was very open-minded and progressive, and even though obviously coal tar is really terrible for the environment, he was one of the first people in this country to do it, and he made like massive strides. He went to Scotland. I mentioned that he was a fisher. He figured out how to transport fish eggs, basically to restock overfished rivers, specifically the Passaic. That was the one he was interested in. And he went to Scotland basically for like this fishing gathering of people who were all avid fishers. And he actually went in front of Congress and he persuaded them to fund the Department of Fisheries, I think, for the very first time. And we have a theory that he imported German goods because while he never actually traveled to Germany, there were all of those German artifacts on site. And we believe that he imported German goods because most of his mill workers were immigrants and he wanted them to be comfortable. And he was very progressive thinking in that way. He really cared for his mill workers, even though they were all immigrants, and he really wanted them to have the best life that he could provide for them. And to finish off, I just wanted to mention the reason that everything in Chatham has a Stanley connection, even though George Shepherd Page is obviously not named Stanley, is because his mother was a Stanley. And the Stanley family is a family of very successful inventors. And he clearly loved his mother and was proud to be from such an impressive lineage, and thus named many things in Chatham after her, including the church, the post office, the store, some parks, etc. So yeah, he was a really impressive guy, and those are the oral histories.
That's great.
So hopefully you can kind of see this is sort of like a little bit of a mystery novel, like archaeology is that we slowly get more and more pieces to try to help us understand these artifacts that we were finding. So between the maps and the oral histories and some of the investigations we've done on the artifacts, we have been able to say that everything that we have is from the late 19th to the early 20th century, which also goes with the structures that are listed to have been there, both the mill as well as potentially domestic structure. And we think that some of this trash may belong to the mill workers or is related to the mills. But we still have much more work, to try to figure out. So now we wanted to really take you into the deeper story of the artifacts because of how much we've been able to learn much more about the life that these artifacts can reveal about these early inhabitants of Chatham. So I'll turn it over to Ava.
Hi, my name is Ava. I'm a senior at Drew University. I'm double majoring in anthropology and Italian and a double minor in music and museum studies / cultural management. So I'm just going to be highlighting a couple of the artifacts that we have found, and from our finds, we were able to kind of categorize them into two different groups, with our first one featuring artifacts that showcase the diet and domestic life of early Chatham during this period. Our first artifact, as Juliet mentioned, is this McLaren's Imperial Cheese Jar, which our actual find is not pictured, but we found an image very similar to what ours looks like, which is in great shape, and the maker's mark is just as visible as you can see here on the right-hand side. This product is one of the many foreign food imports that we learned of while researching, and with this first one, it was produced and manufactured in Canada, as you saw in the map, in Juliet's map. It was a high-end cheese that was released in 1892 and gained global popularity as it was considered to be one of the first soft processed cheeses to be commercially distributed. And the company even had several branch factories across the world, such as in Mexico, London, New York, Japan, Africa, and Chicago.
Aisha?
Hi everyone, I'm Aisha. I'm also a senior at Drew University and I'm studying anthropology and minoring in linguistics and archaeology. So I'm going to be talking about one of these fruit jars that we found on the site. And as you can see in the picture in the center, that's the one that we found from the site. So during this time period in the 1870s, it was basically the era where everyone was inventing everything and everyone was patenting everything that they could. So there was a lot of drama with this particular company, which was the Consolidated Fruit Company jars, between the inventor of the lid, who was John L. Mason, and the owner of the business, who took care of the financial side, his name was, I believe, oh no, I lost his name. sorry, but basically there was a lot of drama between them, but in the end they were able to come together because they weren't making money otherwise, because of John Mason kept losing his patents. So the other partner came and sort of saved him. So it began, so even though the company was founded in New York, the actual factory was in New Jersey. And in figure 1, you can see sort of a sketch of the New Brunswick plant. And it was based on the Raritan River. So this was essentially the start of the mason jar, really, which, you know, to this day, they're still extremely popular. So this is the start, and you can see the pictures on the side as well. And they were extremely popular because they were mass produced and inexpensive as well.
And the glass was the insert. Now that's metal, but it was this glass, the little insert went right into the screw top.
So moving on to the Lee and Perrins Worcestershire bottle and stopper. So like it was mentioned, there is a relationship between Chatham and England. So this company actually started in England and it was imported into America around in 1838. However, in the 1870s, there was a huge push to buy American products produced in America. And that's when these began to be produced in Salem, New Jersey. And these became super popular all throughout America. You know, and eventually they were present through restaurants and hotels and dining rooms. And especially during the gold rush, they became very popular because a lot of people were sort of moving west. And so I included a picture of this painting on the left, which is of the SS Republic. And this was a ship that was sort of lost in a hurricane en route to New Orleans. And they said that it was like carrying over, like, in today's worth, over 18 million dollars worth of products. And one of the products found, there was like 8,000 bottles of the Worcestershire bottle. So just to show how popular and in demand it was.
And we were really excited that we'd found the stopper and the bottle separately, and then through the investigation realized that it was actually the, you know, part of the same object. Oh, I guess this is me, sorry. This was one of the ones that I couldn't resist to do an analysis of. I just became fascinated by the whole story around the, one of our most common artifacts were these white milk glass jars, which come in different sizes, and they all say Armour and Company on the base. So through the investigations, we were able to find that these were jars from Armour and Company out of Chicago. And so this was, these, you know, they, just as we saw with these other examples, this started with, you know, Philip Armour in 1867 and slaughterhouses, and you probably have an idea of how important slaughterhouses became in Chicago. It was at one point in the late 19th century, the single largest employer in the entire United States. Major portion of Chicago was the whole slaughterhouse, the slaughtering industry and meat packing plants. Huge stretch of factories, and these became, you know, quickly grew. It became a leading distributor of meat packing throughout the entire nation, and then eventually began exporting out into Europe. And it just was incredibly diversified. They began to produce not just meat products, but glue, soaps, gelatin, anything that you could make out of any portion of the animals. And their motto was that they aimed to waste nothing of the animal, and their catchphrase was everything but the squeal. And they marketed very heavily, and this is also, we found a lot of very interesting information about the history of advertising and marketing. They really zeroed in on women who began to have some of their own purchasing power because they would be given a household income. So they were really targeting that the women would want to buy this product. And so all of their ads almost always featured women or babies, and always very happy and eating out of the jar. And they also produced cookbooks. This is the sort of early version of bouillon cubes that basically they were selling their product as it was much better, healthier, for you to buy something of meat that has been then processed and made into this product, and then you use that to make soup. So they were trying to sort of push the idea that it was better to use their product than to buy a piece of meat and make it yourself. The problem is that in 1906, Uptown Sinclair published The Jungle after doing some undercover work working in the armor stockyards in Chicago. And this was an explosion, of course. People were shocked. And it became, this was, that obviously Teddy Roosevelt was in a cartoon showing, getting involved in, what do we do, the uproar of the conditions. So it was both the conditions of the workers, which was really Uptown Sinclair's real push, was he was talking about the conditions of the workers, but what people really took away from his work and were more upset about was they found out what was really in these products, which include rat droppings and waste materials, and not always pure meat products as they were being told. So basically the outcome of that scandal was the Food and Drug Administration and the inspections. That was the beginning of all of that in the early 20th century. And so they began to have all kinds of inspections to actually test the products, that what they were making and that what they were saying was true. Actually, very little happened in terms of improving the conditions for the workers. It was really the outcome had to do with the products that were being produced. And Armour's response was to even double down on their marketing and to push much more that these were really pure meat products, and this was the best way to get, to eat meat was through their products. So Uptown Sinclair, I know, was not quite satisfied with what came out of his work. Ava?
So another part of our finds for diet were fragments and entire beer bottles, which we learned were from local breweries and bottle makers. So you may recognize some. And as Juliet mentioned, we had a bottle from the Rising Sun Brewing Company, which was in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And a couple others were of Kruger's Brewing Company in Newark, Valentino Brewery, which is still around today in Newark, and the Brand Brothers Bottlers in Newark as well. And on this slide, we feature some pictures from the bottles we found. So going in a clockwise direction, this is the Brand Brothers Bottlers bottle, which you can't quite tell, but in person you can clearly see it says Otto Brandt, which is one of the names of the brothers, and it had the location of their manufacturer building at 287 Washington Street, Newark, New Jersey. Then we have the Valentino Brewery and Rising Sun Brewing Company bottles, which both feature their maker's mark. So in the Rising Sun, you can kind of see the R with the S in the middle, even Elizabeth, New Jersey, kind of ringing around there. And in the Valentino Brewery, you can see their 3 rings, which is still part of their logo maker's mark today. And finally, really exciting, the Kruger's Brewing Company, we were able to find a complete bottle, which it's a little hard to tell because of the lighting, but it says on the front, G. Kruger BWG Company brewery bottling of Newark, New Jersey. So what was really interesting about these finds in particular was that they kind of showed the interaction and exchange of goods between neighboring towns, and a bit of a preference for local American beer, whereas some of the other food items that were imported, such as the McLaren's cheese and the Worcestershire sauce from Britain. So I thought that was a little interesting. And throughout our finds in the diet and domestic life, we begin to recognize the food habits and tastes of early Chatham residents in this time period, as well as the role of marketing and globalization and how it affected their domestic life and the products that they used. And then our next slide gets into our second category, which has to do with fashion and style in the late 19th century to early 20th century in early Chatham, but more on a broader scale. And then our next slide, it was really exciting. We found a lot of pieces pertaining to corsets. So just a very brief history of corsets in the 19th century. It reflected a more natural form of the female body. They were used by all women, regardless of class, and it represented and showcased their beauty. These undergarments were even used on younger children and teenage girls to begin shaping their bodies and preparing for womanhood. So we can clearly see here that the female figure had a precise look, which was the hourglass and small waist figure. So in order to achieve this look, It called for heavily boned corsets and tight lacing underneath the high-waisted and long-flowing dresses, which was the style of the time. So in order to kind of ease this process, it was really interesting. The pieces that we found kind of fit into this little puzzle piece that this French corsetier, Jean-Julien Josselin, definitely butchered his name, invented the split busk in 1829, which is a front-facing slot and stud closure to remove a corset without unlacing it. So this was a huge invention and again, a lot more popularity in the US after 1848 when Joseph Cooper patented the design. And here we were able to find an example from the Met's collection of the Crotty and Richards corset with the split busk feature. So it was like two metal slabs with the little pegs on it. One side had the pegs, one side had the little, they don't really have a name, but it's like the slot and stud closure. So you can clearly see that here in the outline of the corset where those slabs are and then the pegs. And then I just included some pictures of our finds, which included over 20 pieces of the metal corset slot/pegs, which are oval-like shapes with an opening in the center to insert the little piece, as well as ring pieces of corset grommets and eyelets. Some are in better condition than others, but it was really interesting to find all of these tiny little pieces. And then on the men's side of style, we found a lot of suspender pieces and potentially garter pieces. Suspenders were an integral style piece in men's fashion during the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century. They were decorative accessories that also served an essential purpose of holding up your undergarments and high-waisted pants. And the British designer Albert Thurston created one of the first forms of suspenders that attached via leather loops, and they are actually still manufactured today. So some of the original designs that were present back then were of the H back, the X back, and the Y back, and they featured different cloths such as wool, cotton, and silks. So our suspender pieces featured in this collection include a mix of buckles and adjuster pieces, along with some other unidentifiable but related metal pieces that could have belonged to either other areas of the suspender strap or the garters and garter belts, which you see some pictures here. And in our next slide, we included a little bit more of our collection. There are still tons more, even on the site. It's just every time we go, we just tend to find more pieces. But as you can see, some are very detailed, including that little suspender piece of the bird right there. And what was interesting enough is that there was a common type of suspender adjuster we kept finding, which was made by C.H. Guyot, which according to their marketing and advertising campaigns were of the highest quality and the most recognizable suspenders. So here we included an image of one of the suspender adjusters that clearly say C.H. Guyot on them. And interestingly enough, we were able to find a picture of specific C.H. Guyot suspenders worn by President Roosevelt. And kind of heading over to the marketing side of it, it was really interesting because what you see here the marketing kind of instills a sort of like social pressure that calls out to any man who does not specifically wear Guyot suspenders, claiming that it was hygienically, every man commits a crime against common sense if he does not wear Guyot suspenders. So we kind of see what the influence of marketing had upon the style industry, the fashion industry. And then our next slide, I'll hand it off to our professor for a really interesting find that we also made during our research for the suspender pieces.
Yeah, we since the beginning, we were always very interested in, how we would find all these little metal pieces. And it really wasn't until this year's, our research this semester, really having the students focus on the analysis that we were able to really zero in on what these pieces were. But it still was strange because first we had thought that against the records that there was actually some kind of clothing manufacturing going on. We know that Milburn was producing hats at this time. So there was clothing and textile manufacturing going on. We know Patterson was large in terms of textile production. So we thought that there was clothing production going on at the site that just wasn't recorded in the historic records or the oral histories. But the more we looked, we realized that it wasn't that there was one kind of suspender clasp. It was so many different kinds. So we thought if you have a factory where you're producing clothing, you would probably just bring in bulk one kind of suspender clasp. You wouldn't have, 50 different varieties and just one or two of each one. So besides C.H. Guyot, every other one is just very, very different. So through looking on the internet, Ava found this other site from Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, which is a Civil War related to Civil War. There was an encampment as well as a series of hospitals there, as in battlefields, and there was a clothing dump. And when we looked at the pictures of their artifacts, it's incredibly similar to the exact span, buttons, porcelain buttons, metal buttons, different kinds of clasps, all kinds of pieces from suspenders. So we believe that we may be talking about some kind of a clothing dump, but we're not quite sure why exactly it would be there and if it was associated. Obviously, it's on the industrial side where we think the mill, where the other mill deposits are. So we believe it's related to the workers at the mill, but it's one of our things that we're further investigating. Why are there all these clothing pieces there? But this was an interesting comparative find. So Amy and Emily, do you want to finish this up?
Yep. So just a couple of conclusions that we drew from our findings is by the late 19th century, the inhabitants of historic Chatham nestled along the Passaic River and had access to both local and international products. And a couple of the more local products include towns from Newark, New York City, and Philadelphia. And a little bit further away, though still domestic, is Chicago. But we also found artifacts from companies internationally, including Canada and those in Europe, such as England and Germany. And just a couple other broader themes that we found were just industrialization, the influence of marketing and advertising, and globalization. And just a couple key points that we learned is that the place and participation of Chatham, New Jersey in the changing and dynamic history of industrialization and early globalization, and the use and usefulness of the digital tools and databases and digitalized information for specialized research and artifacts, particularly Omeka and WordPress. And finally, the power of oral interviews and history to give new context to the material remains. And one of the most surprising things that we found was the number of artifacts just laying around the park that were left just to be stepped on or maybe left to the weather. And additionally, the limitations of historical records that focus on the history and factory owners of the time. And then for our final slide, we just have a couple acknowledgements that Emily is going to talk about.
I'm muted. There we go. So we would like to acknowledge everyone who helped us over the course of this semester, everyone who made it possible for us to grow and learn. Obviously, we wouldn't be here without Dr. Masucci. I know she didn't put herself on this slide, but obviously she's in charge of this class, and so none of this would have happened without her. I'd like to thank Susan Allen of the Chatham Historical Society for starting me down the road on the oral histories and just providing us with our initial information, as well as Pam and Martha Wells of the Chatham Township Historical Society for giving a great oral history, lots of information. Sarah Stanley and her husband, Don, for giving us yet another interview. The Drew University Digital Humanities Program and Digital Humanities Funding through the support of the Mellon Foundation. Danielle, who helped Amy with all of the technological stuff, and Katie Caljean of the Maryland Historical Society. And for everyone who lives in Chatham Township, you know, everyone who lives there, who does live there, who allowed us to come in, and who left everything there for us to investigate. We just really appreciate all of it. And we appreciate you guys for coming and watching our presentation.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, students. You did a fantastic job. I'm really proud of you guys.
So too.
Yeah. Does anyone have, you know, we're hoping that there might be questions or even more interesting insights from, you know, your grandparents or great grandparents or anything that you might know about the history of the area. We're love to add to what we have.
I have a question. Understanding that you've gathered all these artifacts and they do tell a story of some kind, to what extent were you able to learn about the actual workers and laborers who worked in the mills? The artifacts themselves do tell a story. They're pieces to a puzzle, but what do you know about their lifestyle, given the fact that they probably lived somewhere very close to the mill, if not at the mill site itself, given the fact that you found the porcelain pieces, porcelain doll pieces, as well as the fact that there was like a company store and what that means to a working class of people who are not only connected to their place of employment, but now their home life is connected to their place of employment as well with regard to where they buy products, et cetera.
I'll let some of the students talk as well, but I just want to say that right from the beginning, I was immediately incredibly frustrated that every time we look up an artifact, we could get so much information about the history of this, you know, this individual, usually, I'm just going to say it, you know, a white male, you know, immigrant, or else someone who, you know, pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and invented this company, got a patent and became incredibly wealthy. But if we ever tried to find out like anything about the factory workers of making any of those products, the only thing we thought is maybe after COVID, we could get hold of diaries. But it is a huge hole. The artifacts were leading us down the route of, you know, the companies and the big, you know, the history of the big factory owners. And that's why we were so interested about when we had the Armor and Company, because that was where we could get a window. But once again, even when that was exposed, the conditions of the factory workers, it didn't even help. Like, it didn't help that much, the factory workers. And so that's why the clothing pieces are so interesting to us, because it feels like there's a window there to the actual people who were at the site. But even then, it's hard for us to explain what does that mean to have all those clothing pieces. So that was my reaction. I don't know if anyone wanted to add their sense, you know, about that.
Oh, Marie, you were fabulous. You and Amy and Juliet and Emily and Ava and Aisha, all of you, it was so fascinating to think about a place that's so close to us and that has such a history. That means that so many places locally have this kind of history, and it takes someone like you to bring it all together. And you're a terrific teacher, obviously, and the students are so bright, and with all their work that they're tracking down this, like you say, it's a mystery, and it's fascinating. And just even what you told us about Upton Sinclair's, you know, how Armor advertising and fake advertising, what it did for people. But it was fascinating and I loved it. And I hope that you'll come back with your students and tell us about other things that you have, that you're teaching.
I have a comment, which is the digital presentation was stunning to me because I was in college so long ago when we learned a lot from books. We did maybe get to sites, but it seems to me it must be revolutionizing the way subjects like this are taught. And it just made it come alive in a very dramatic way. Not that you couldn't see it in books, but the discussion around it, it was a wonderful presentation. It was great.
Too. I loved it.
Thank you so much. It's the students, really. They did. I would say that I didn't teach this class. They taught me. They found the tools. They went out and did it. It's really their work. And yeah. But you know, and I thank you so much for the comments. And I would say that we really are looking for, even though this was fantastic and it wouldn't have happened if it wouldn't have been, we call it the COVID cookies, right? The few things that, I don't want to say positive, but you know what I mean, that came out because of COVID. But we are also anxious to get out there. And this is that earlier question, to try to look at some more oral histories and diaries and get to the people, like that does feel like a whole, like we want to, there was George Page built like a whole street of houses for his workers. And I feel like there must be some records of that and what their lives were like. So.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you, Maria, and of course the people, all your students are so fortunate to have you, and you are so fortunate to have such bright, caring, brilliant students. Thank you,
Right.
and I hope you'll come back again. And
We will. You're always such a great audience. Thank you so much for inviting us.
so much.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
you.
All. Healthy and
Thanks.
happy, and have a great week.
You too. Everyone be safe and well, and hope to see you in person next year.
Oh, definitely. That would
Yeah.
be wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.